Dana's in Berlin, so we Zoom and.
She's back in Berlin.
She got stuck in Berlin.
Oh, got stuck.
She got stuck in Berlin after the shutdown.
Yeah, so we're live now.
All right.
I'll pick up the mic and say a thing or two to them. It is 10 o'clock, so we're on schedule. You got some water there? Okay. I think I'll just sit down here. I think they can see me. Hi, folks. Welcome to Bird and Beckett. I hope you can hear me. I'm sort of sound and camera here, so it's a mystery to me. But I think their mics are pretty good. These are our folks that have been associated in the San Francisco Study Center, starting in what year?
1972 we started.
Okay, going back to 1972. And the reason for this presentation, the proximate cause, is that Geoff, directly behind me, just put new energy into disseminating the book called Death in the Tenderloin, which they published in 2012, just as certain things were sort of starting to become problematic. So the book kind of didn't get a huge launch. It got out there a bit. We had it in the store right away. I found it. I did have it
you did?
in inventory
All right.
early on, but then didn't have copies for a long time. So now it's definitely worth a look, and they'll talk about the study center itself, some of that background about the newspaper, the Central City Extra that they produced along the way as well, and that had some of the content that makes up the content of the book. So anyway, we have Marjorie Beggs here on my right, your left, I suppose, and Tom Carter on this side, whatever opposite side that is. They were both contributed huge amounts of writing to the newspaper and to the book, and lots and lots of work into the study center itself. And Geoff Link, who was there from the beginning, and he was the editor of the book itself, and he'll explain all his role in the organization and the newspaper and the book. So it should be a good conversation. It'll go about an hour. We'll finish up at 11, and you can come down to the store at noon. We'll open the doors for business. So, all right. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank
Really
you for
appreciate
having
it.
us.
You're welcome.
Okay, here they go.
All right. I'm Geoff Link. I'm the executive director of the San Francisco Study Center. It started in 72 as a means of empowering the burgeoning neighborhood movement. I came in 1974, and Marjorie joined me in 77. So we were at the Grant Building from the time, if anybody remembers that, was quite a nonprofit landmark at the corner of 7th and Market. And when I got there in 74, the Greyhound bus station was still across the street where the Federal Building is. And so our first book was Understanding San Francisco's Budget, and we did a newsletter that covered City Hall. We were the first actual news outlet that covered the committee meetings of the supervisors and the PUC and all that. And so Marjorie came in 77, and she's still with me as at the study center as the senior writer-editor. And the manager of our fiscal sponsor directory, which is a free nationwide resource for fiscal sponsors and projects that want to get started without having to wait for the IRS ruling that gives them 501c3 status. The first issue of the book Death in the Tenderloin that we published through our Study Center Press imprint it grew out of, that book grew out of obituaries that we published in the Central City Extra. The first issue is here, and the study center answered a RFP from the community for a neighborhood newspaper. We were awarded the contract, so we started it out, and that was in 2000, at a time when the Tenderloin was looking forward to having opening a pavilion that was going to be the overflow from Moscone and was going to transform the Tenderloin. Well, as you all can imagine, that didn't happen, and the Tenderloin has only gone downhill since. But we've been part of that, right on the outskirts of that neighborhood, and then later at Market and Mason and Turk, where we got displaced to. But so the study center was really a place where we sort of were able to chronicle the not only the goings on at City Hall, but the goings on at the street as we watched homelessness grow as an issue, and we had a kind of in 2002 in our building. This was a story that Tom wrote, The Live-In Thief, someone who was homeless, except they had the grant building for a home, and they kind of ripped us all off. The Central City Extra also, we did the first fentanyl story, which, as you know, has caused I don't know, a couple of deaths a day now, and we called it the Super Smack. And also in this issue was Tom Carter writing about being Muslim in the Tenderloin. This newspaper was quite different from the majority of newspapers for neighborhoods in the city, and we covered everything. When the tech companies came in, and here is Homeless to Healthy by Marjorie Beggs about the Curry Center. This was the kind of stuff that we were featuring all the time. When the Twitter tax break hit, this is actually afterward, but the Central City Extra was the only newspaper that covered the Twitter tax break as a beat. No one else did that. And in 2004, Glenda Hope came and asked us about covering memorials for people that had died in the neighborhood. And Tom kind of picked that up, and he can tell you how he got started, because this was the first time that people were who we didn't even have their last name in many of these obituaries, and there certainly were no vital statistics from the city or any place else. Everything was what people knew of them. They were the stories, and the book that we created is actually, I think there's 100 obituaries, and these are like short stories, and an anthology of short stories that does. These are a number of the people who are in the book, and it's just like the book just like the Extra. We published that in a kind of impoverished neighborhood, and we were 2-color, and we went 4-color with that the week before the Chronicle did go 4-color. So what we've always thought of, we published it on book paper instead of newsprint, and our idea was the folks in our neighborhood need the best we can do. And these are our tributes, in a sense, to them, but they're like short stories. And the book also has essays on the causes of death in the Tenderloin. There's an essay on Glenda Hope, a profile of her, who was the one who brought us the obituaries. And Tom can take it from here.
Yes, thanks, Geoff. Glenda had called us to see if we would be interested in covering the memorials that she had begun with a Catholic nun back in 1977 at the Adult Hotel. She said she was kind of concerned that if anyone would show up when it was announced that she and this nun were going to have a memorial for a man who had died there. And she said she was enormously impressed when, I don't know how many people showed up, but it was very crowded, 25, 30 people, and they'd all dressed up for it. So that was pretty good confirmation. And she kept doing these memorials then in SROs. When someone would die, the social worker would call Glenda, and Glenda would arrange for a memorial. And then in 2004, Glenda called Geoff and said, would you guys be interested in covering these memorials as a further dignifying of a single person? These people have been so far under the radar and living in borderline poverty. And as Geoff has frequently said, they never had their name in a newspaper. If we'd be interested in covering these, and it just was an electrifying thought. And we said yes right away. So Marjorie and I started covering these, and then Mark Dean, and every now and then we'd have a guest obit writer, but that was kind of few and far between. For me, it was, I had been reporting a bit in the Tenderloin, but it was a revelation to be covering a memorial, to hear what other people said about someone who had passed and the kind of life they led and what was important to them. And it was just all over the place. You can't really imagine how diverse all these lives were. I was impressed with a number of these people, really, from the ones who had and continued to achieve something, and to others who hadn't appeared to achieve anything but just had a love of something, whether it was cats or art or collecting things. So maybe I should mention a few of the stories that really impressed me. I suppose the most famous to me would be the Godfather of the Empress. This was a man who, I think he did refer to himself as the Godfather. He set himself up in his room on weekends and would have somebody at the door, allowing people to enter one at a time, to sit in a chair across from him, and he would ask them, "What do you need?" And they would tell him, and he would then try to give them on the spot what they needed, whether it was a couple of dollars or a new toothbrush or a notebook, anything like that. And it was conducted just like in the movie. So that was an example of...
and here he is right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one was this guy who collected bicycle parts. It was known all over his area in the Tenderloin that, if you had a bicycle part, you could give it to this guy and he'd add it to his collection and try to make a bicycle out of these parts, which he would do, and then he'd give the bicycles away. So that was another memorable one. And Marjorie did a little research on all of the obits that we wrote for the book to find out that the average age when people died was 55. And the obits we did, the ages varied enormously from, I remember, 2 20-year-olds who died. Jimmy Mai, the Vietnamese boy, and then Sito, it may have been gang connected, but he was shot and killed and just had a baby, just had a job, just was married. Everything was coming up roses for him until he got shot to death. And then on the other side,
and this is that essay, "Those Who Died." The book is organized with essays in between different types of deaths, and this is Marjorie's on the roundup on everybody who died. We've got others. There's and Glenda Hope, who has been discussed here. We have a shot of her. Let's see if we can find that. Here she is. We called her the closer. And she had been in the Tenderloin for a very long time as director of a program called Network Ministries. And she actually didn't retire too long ago. I mean, it was a little bit ago, but anyhow, you will find the thing with calling it Death in the Tenderloin. It sort of sounds like a paperback novel. But what we tried to do with this book is to look at death in a variety of ways. There's an essay on the causes of death, that AIDS was the number one, cancer number two. We have there's an essay on murder in the Tenderloin, the killings that are done by commuter criminals. So what you get is not only the stories of basically most of them anonymous people being, as short stories, but the context for their lives, causes of death, and things like that. So this is actually, there's a lot of journalism beyond the reporting of the obituaries. And Marjorie was the one who did probably the second most stories in here. And you want to talk about some of yours?
Just before you do that, let me conclude. I was talking about the ages of people who die and mentioned the youngest. I just wanted to finish that by saying who the oldest was. It was a Chinese woman living right in the middle of the Tenderloin who died at the age of 96.
And that brings up an interesting fact about the obituaries, is that almost all of them were men. I think I have a fact here. It says 75% were men. I don't know that links up with the number of people in the Tenderloin, but certainly with the memorials, we very rarely had women. Memorials for women, and I'm not sure why that is, even to this day, except that I think maybe they were more private, maybe they told somebody they didn't want it. Memorials had become very common in some of these hotels. The people living there were living with death all the time, and some people got memorials and some people didn't, but most of them were men. There are a lot of interesting things about those memorials. They were common in the hotels. The circumstances were often shocking. A lot of people died in their rooms, and that would always come up at the memorials, that they had died in their rooms. A few died in hospitals, but I think more of them died in their rooms. And
I think you had 72%.
72%. Oh, yeah, 70% died in their SROs. Thank you, Tom. Yeah. I'd forgotten the statistic.
They'd like you a little closer to the mic, so
Okay.
we'll try not to
All right.
crowd you, but
Okay,
let's try that.
all right. And the age also, I think, is significant. I think the average age in the Tenderloin, or the average age in San Francisco of death for men is 78 in San Francisco. The average age of our obituaries was 55, as you said. So that most of them had very difficult lives. Almost everyone had been homeless before they moved to an SRO, and that was part of the reason why their deaths were so young, I think. The other thing about the obituaries that I remember is when we first started, Glenda would send me an email, and somebody, whoever had time, would go to the memorial. And it was kind of hit or miss. Maybe there was one a week, one every 2 weeks or something. By the height of it, maybe in the mid-2000s, when we were doing the 2006 or 7, when we were doing a lot of them, I actually had to coordinate who was going to do the memorials because they were coming so fast and furious. I would call Tom, do you have time? I would call Mark, did you have time? Or can we get, I think Leah Garchik once did a guest obit for us, and we would find other people who would do obits for us because they were so many, coming so many. And then, like an arc, they started slowly, they got to be a lot, and then they sort of fell off toward the end. Our last ones were done maybe a year or two before the last extra was printed, which was, I think we stopped printing in 2016. And one of the reasons the numbers had dropped off of memorials, the memorials hadn't dropped off, we just weren't being invited to them anymore. And
the Department of Public Health was concerned about HIPAA privacy policies and didn't recognize that these were folks who actually never got any kind of public recognition, and there was not really a problem. But the DPH did start threatening contractors the social workers who provided the services in the supportive housing. and said, well, you're going to lose your contract if you tell people about your clients. So they just, rather than lose their contract, didn't contact the Extra anymore. But supportive housing was the very first supportive housing in the neighborhood was the Cadillac Hotel. And there is an obituary on Leroy Looper, who was the executive director of Reality House West that had started the Cadillac Hotel as supportive housing. They used to have, when they first started, they had seniors on one floor and ex-offenders on another floor. And that's really how, and then on the first floor were just other people from the neighborhood. But that's how supportive housing started. That was probably in the late 70s when that got going. But it was HIPAA privacy rules that kept us away from being able to continue to cover and recognize these people's lives.
Some of the obituaries are very, very short, maybe a paragraph or two at the most. Others are 1,000 words. Partly that's because some of the memorials we went to were sparsely attended, would be a charitable description of it. There might be one other person at this memorial besides one of us being the reporter and the social worker and Glenda Hope or whoever was officiating at it. And so there wasn't much to say about it. And we went and did the obituary anyway, just gave the person's name, the little bit of information we had.
Sometimes interviewing the desk clerk on the way out.
Yeah. And other times there would be 25 people, and everybody wanted to say what they remembered about the person.
Those obits, those memorials at the Ambassador in the big room.
Right.
When I've been there when there were 35, 40 people.
Right.
And the Ambassador Hotel, which is at the corner of Mason and Eddy, that Tom is talking about, was the pretty much the AIDS hotel during the height of the epidemic, and Tom wrote the obituary for Hank Wilson, who managed the Ambassador and took care of people himself, along with
nobody
Glenda,
else was.
because nobody else was. Nobody even knew what it was. We called him the Teresa of the Tenderloin. And this story does, there is quite a bit more to it. This is one of the longer pieces. But it is also one of the most moving, and it gives you a picture of the inside of the AIDS epidemic from the point of view of the man who cared for people, brought them in off the street, gave them a place to live out their last days. So some of these obituaries that are in here are of really important people. Well, they're all important, no doubt about it. But people who also had some real impact in the neighborhood beyond their own social network. And so really, I think what you get out of this book is a picture of the Tenderloin at a time that isn't it. You won't get this same thing today, and it's really this kind of decade or so that we captured. In a way, it was at the height of when the neighborhood was at its, we'll say, it was always the most impoverished neighborhood. It's the lowest income neighborhood in San Francisco, much lower than Bayview, Hunters Point, or any other, or Viz Valley, or any other. It's about a third of the people were seniors, a third of the people were disabled. It just didn't have people who a lot of people came off the street to die in support of housing. And so I think this was the height of the housing. It was before the Twitter tax break gentrified the neighborhood, and before all the tent cities kind of took over. And in the book where we talk about the commuter killings and stuff, you really get a picture of how the neighborhood was also taken advantage of by people who would come in from the East Bay and sell drugs, hold up people. A lot of people were being victimized by commuter criminals. And so what we tried to do really was capture the whole notion of death in the Tenderloin.
The obits were considered the most popular part of the Central City Extra. That's the other thing that happened all the time. We hope people read our newspaper, but what we always heard from people was that they loved the obituaries. They loved reading the obituaries. And if we happened to have an issue that didn't have an obituary, we got a phone call from somebody who would say, there are no obituaries in this last issue. What happened? That may be true of all newspapers, but it was really notable for us with this small newspaper we were doing, because we would spend days and sometimes weeks writing long stories, analyzing what was going on in the Tenderloin, and never hear a word from anybody about it. But we always heard about the obituaries. And so I think they were a very important part of the community at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Often people would come up to me and say, it's the first thing I turn to when I pick up the Extra.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But Tom, there's I don't know if I brought that issue, but in talking about like the commuter criminals, Tom was out on the street one day, and a guy encountered a guy with a knife who Tom was smarter and faster.
I was actually on my way to a police station meeting at 6 in the evening, or a little after 6 in the evening, and I was walking through this small crowd of people. I don't know whether it was what street it was on now, but this guy just jumped out, put his arm around me with one hand, and with his other hand, which he had in his coat, poked out his knuckle and shoved it into my side like it was a gun and said, "Give me your money." And I don't know, I was reactive. I don't know where that came from, but I just spun off from him. But I didn't have anywhere to go. I was then right up against a wall to my back. And in high school, I was a point guard. I very quick on my feet. Still am, by the way. So I knew I might be able to get around him. So I faked to the right and then faked to the left and then went around right out in the middle of the street and kept running. And as I was running, I heard some woman yell, "Leave that man alone." But I outran this guy. And anyway, one thing I wanted to make clear is once your heart really gets into this, as soon as you start romanticizing the Tenderloin, it'll kick you in the ass.
Too true. And that was always a problem with writing the obituaries also, because the memorials were very emotional places when there were people there to talk about the person who had died. And we were there as reporters, so we had to have that distance, that little bit of objective distance, but we also had to be drawn into it or we wouldn't be able to write anything about it that had any heart in it. But I think you're right about it. You know, you can't really romanticize it. And then one of our staff members was beaten up delivering newspapers in the Tenderloin. So
Yeah.
He was in intensive care for a couple of days.
Yes.
Yeah, so it definitely was a tough neighborhood that the study center not only reported on, but we're a fiscal sponsor, and we manage programs for the Department of Public Health and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and the Office of Economic and Workforce Development and Children, Youth, and Families, and quite a variety of city departments. So, in a sense, the newspaper was kind of reporting on the people who the study center was managing the programs, the direct service programs that served these folks. Many of them. We, as a fiscal sponsor, we started the Open Hand. Exit Theater, which does the San Francisco Fringe Festival.
Friends of the Urban Forest.
Yeah, we've actually done. We've got quite a few programs. Housing Rights Committee now, and KA 24, and a number of programs that we manage. So the obituaries really are 100 people that our folks were serving in the community every day.
Maybe we should open it up to any questions out there. What do you think, guys?
Let me tell them what they can do there. I think this mic is live. So yeah, feel free if you want to relay any questions to us through the Facebook chat or the YouTube chat. I'll mention them to the folks. We've got a little less than 20 minutes to go, about 15 plus a few. So yeah, the one comment was from Julie Fisher, who just really thanks you for helping us get to know the city we live in. Very, very, very useful to hear this. So.
Well, we can, there are we could actually show more of the book, I guess.
Yeah, well, they won't be able to see it real well on the
Yeah,
camera without me getting
that's true.
kind of. I can try, but why don't you talk about leaf through there and mention a specific thing or two?
Or maybe we could read something.
Yeah, sure. Maybe each of you
Those
guys
those
would
of us
try
who
to-
have eyes.
Some of those smaller ones.
Here's one, the activist wife of an activist. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but Loretta Florence Phillips. Well, I can't. I'm having a hard time. Overcame a crippling childhood and as an adult conquered alcoholism to eventually find peace and stability in the Tenderloin. Phillips began life in New Orleans in 1922 with 2 strikes against her. She was born with polio and her mother died in childbirth. The devastating viral infection that put people in leg braces and iron lungs knew no class. It also inflicted opera star Renata Tebaldi in 1922 and Franklin Delano Roosevelt the year before. Her father gave her up to a convent, said her husband Marvis Phillips, after her memorial at the Alexander residence, where she lived for more than 30 years. A lot of these folks were longtime residents there. And this is an obituary that Tom did some extra reporting on, so that's why, and actually a number of these do. We tackled these as much as almost like news stories, because we were trying to get as much information as we could. But she was determined to walk as a little girl, and she did. She never had to have leg braces. The plucky Loretta Phillips rebounded from other misfortunes. Marvis Phillips said her father reclaimed her at age 6 and moved to Chicago. Her father raped her when she was 13, and she had a child, Phillips said. Then the father kicked her out when she was 18, and she was homeless in Chicago before they had adequate welfare. The authorities took her child away, and she never saw her child again. I'm not going to finish the whole thing, but when it's not uncommon in these people's lives to be reading about things that you only read about in novels or, but it is daily life or Batman. Here's Batman next to Marvis Phillips' ex-wife, Loretta Phillips. Earned his Batman nickname by keeping a vigil over the neighborhood while he seated at the window at his 5th floor Elm Hotel room. The self-appointed street savior claimed to know many of the shopkeepers below and would tip Elm staff to any untoward activity in their vicinity. He saw himself as a peacekeeper, said case worker Adam Decker. Morgan, a garrulous teller of tall tales, often would get lost in his random thoughts until someone pulled him back to his storyline. He was prominent and entertaining at the SRO's Wednesday breakfast group discussion in the lobby where his memorial was held. And that's the thing. What you also get out of these is a kind of a sense of what life is like in the hotels, where people, spent all their time. A lot of people were reluctant to go out on the street unless they had to. They'd have to go to, there were corner stores, and no supermarkets or anything. So what we captured, I think, in a lot of these stories is scenes from daily life. So when you get this book, if you do read it, there is so much color and facts about this very distinct neighborhood in the heart of San Francisco. I mean, it goes from Polk to Mason, from Market to Post, and that's the boundaries of the Tenderloin. We do have a map that we of the neighborhood, and many of the programs that serve people are also here in this. And it's a map that John Blanchard, who is the Chronicle main map maker and graphic artist, he did that that map of the neighborhood. So just that alone gives you, it's got the SROs where all the people lived, and they're located, as well as the programs that served them. So there's quite a bit of regular mainstream journalism that is in this, but told in a way that puts it in the context of these obituaries.
So we are getting a few questions, but I wonder if each of you would read a bit of an obituary from the thing, and then I'll relay some questions to you. So Marjorie, do you have?
Let me see if I can.
Tommy is going to have a hard time.
I want to read a short one of Tom's, okay, rather than one of my own. The little headline on this is "On Oxygen, Smoked Anyway." William Hamilton was a familiar sight around the Jefferson Hotel on Eddy Street. Everywhere he went, he pulled along his 2-foot oxygen cylinder on wheels, its plastic tubes thrust into his nose, and all the while he smoked cigarettes. He smoked until the day he died, said hotel manager Brian Samuel. A dozen friends and acquaintances gathered at the SRO to pay their respects. John A., no other name, wrote a poem and drew an abstract with colored pencils. It was placed alongside a page bearing the signatures of 50 Jefferson residents that was lying on a table near a colorful bouquet. No one in the room had known Hamilton well, though he called the Jefferson home for at least 5 years. They guessed he was 75, maybe 78. He was polite, they said, but kept to himself. He frequented Lafayette Coffee Shop around the corner, a Hyde Street landmark. Samuel said not everyone knew how generous he was. Hamilton had a retirement income, Samuel said, not simply Social Security or SSI like most. Sometimes he'd help a neighbor pay their rent when they came up short. Medical examiner Charles Cecil said Hamilton died from emphysema at age 56. This was one of the first obits you wrote in 2004, Tom.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's very typical. No one knew the person well. They guessed he was 75.
Yeah.
The medical examiner said he was 56.
Yeah.
You know, he had lived there for 5 years and nobody knew him.
Yeah. Gee whiz. Yeah. I'm not sure if I can read anything. I have to do a magnifying glass, and I can't.
But here's one called "A Man of Lightning Wit." His name is Christopher Clanton. This is one that Marjorie wrote. When Connie Clanton visited her brother, Christopher Clanton, at St. Francis Memorial Hospital, She asked if she could get anything for him. Chris was intubated for pneumonia at the time, and he could barely speak and couldn't eat, she recalls. But he let me know he wanted Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. Her brother had been in and out of St. Francis Hospital several times before he died at age 47, and she recalled his last days for mourners gathered at the Elm Hotel. Those days were precious to her, she said, because until she heard about him, his failing health in May, she hadn't seen him for many years. Sam, that was Chris's nickname, always loved to eat, she said. Our mother, who couldn't travel here today, wrote this poem and sent it to me to read. And there is a poem called Sam, and I'll just start it out. Sam liked nearly every kind of food, oranges, apples, nuts, and cheese. And when his mother gave him carrots, he'd say, I want more of these. Brussels sprouts and cabbage, celery and green beans. How to get enough? He'd plot and plan and scheme. Give me lots of vegetables, meat and potatoes too. I will eat them one by one, or even in a stew. Cereal and crackers, muffins, bread and jam, milk and eggs and plenty of juice. I can eat them, yes I can. Only one food Sam strongly resisted. Broccoli he would not eat. He stubbornly insisted. Don't give me broccoli, mother, if you please. I don't want to eat them. They look like little trees. You're right, his mother said, trying her very best, trying not to laugh, while Sam ate all the rest. And that ends that obituary that Marjorie wrote. And you know, we were picking up stuff, whatever we could, that would give a sense of people, because there was, like, you know, there was nothing in the newspaper. There was nothing from the city. There were no facts or anything about people's lives, and a lot of the people never even knew, who came to the memorials, didn't know the person last name. They knew him by a first name, and that was, you know, that's just relationships in a neighborhood like that. So, we're reporters, and we grab off whatever we can to tell the story.
So there have been a few good questions, and I'm going to start with sort of the most recent one and then backtrack a little bit. But the question is at the other end of the room, so I'm just kind of summarizing it, and I don't remember the person's name who submitted it. But she wants to know if, you must have formed a lot of relationships that were a little more than just passing, and are there people that really stand out in your mind, whether they're individuals who were living in the SROs or people that you were associated with that you want to mention? And if you were to walk back into some of those places, do you think that are there people that persist there that would recognize you and that you fall into conversation with when you do go to that territory?
Well, I tell you the truth. The study center was displaced twice. Once from the building, the Grant building, and then once in 2000, at the end of 2013, from Market and Turk and Mason. So really, there was, by this time, everybody's different. They're not there anymore, so we couldn't go back. But someone who, he's not in the obituaries, but he's a great poet that Ed Bowers. And we published a number of his pieces in Central City Extra, and he's done a couple of things. We had him cover for the Extra landmarks in the neighborhood, 5 landmarks, and won a prize from the San Francisco Press Club for Poetry is Journalism, and we put it on the cover of the Extra, and Edward, I would know Ed going back there, but the Mark Ellinger, who had
Ed has a poem in the book, and this is his last line.
Oh, that's right. The last line that's on the book cover. Just because no one can see a face doesn't mean it's gone. And that's under a photograph by Mark Ellinger, who was a photographer in the neighborhood who we helped get started. And that's right under, actually, the cover, the back cover promotional stuff about what the book is about by Jim Milden, writer and editor, who was a mentor to Tom and I at SF State when we were together. Tom and I have been working together since 1963. We were both on the daily newspaper out there at State. Tom covered Selma for the Gator back in the day.
Let's see. Maria Guillen asks about have there been literally contracts that you think may have made a big difference in the work that's attempted to be done in the Tenderloin over the years? Were there points, I guess, when certain policies really were effective for a good stretch?
No. I mean, honestly, I can illustrate that with the Twitter tax break. Mm-hmm. Jane Kim wrote the Twitter tax break legislation. And supposedly what that was going to do was to give Twitter and 5 other tech companies a tax break if they would provide benefits to the community. That was in March of 2011. And immediately after that first piece of legislation that created the break, she created a piece of legislation for a community advisory committee of, I think it was 7 or 9 members, that was supposed to be sort of like the all of the community benefits would come to them, and they were supposed to represent the community in the Tenderloin in terms of getting benefits. But Jane Kim wrote the legislation so that they had no power. They were a rubber stamp, and she and I'm going to say it, colluded with basically Naomi Kelly, who is just the recently departed city administrator, and Bill Barnes was the PR guy who had worked with Chris Daly, who some people will remember as a supervisor. But essentially, they created a community committee that had no power whatsoever, and they made that was a deliberate strategy. So, in other words, if Twitter wanted to do something, they could do it. If Twitter didn't want to do something for the neighborhood, they didn't have to do it. And the neighborhood had no power. So it didn't really get the benefit of what it was supposed to get.
There were a couple of questions early on, Marianne Pedley and Zachary Wicker, that are kind of interrelated. Zachary specifically wanted you to explain the commuter killings a little bit more specifically. He wasn't really familiar with that. And Marianne was asking what changes have happened over time in the Tenderloin that you can really kind of relate.
Well, I have a general comment about that. When I was a reporter there, I worked with or interviewed a number of police captains, starting with Gary Jimenez, and then Kathy Brown, and then Joe Garrity.
And
This
then
was
Susan
over several
Vanheimer.
years, and they knew what was going on. With the Tenderloin, it was bad people coming in on BART, getting off right there on Market Street, and going to work in the Tenderloin selling drugs. And they were linked up with a larger structure, and they had to make their nut. They had to sell a certain amount every day, and if not, they suffered some kind of consequence. And some of them had guns and others didn't. But that's where so much crime came from, and it was Oakland and Richmond. All these police captains said the same thing.
Has that persisted?
As far as I know, today, I have not been down there reporting in some years, but Geoff, do you know anything about that from the Chronicle?
That there are, I think it's the same thing. People,
Same pattern.
The girls would come in from Oakland and Richmond and walk the streets in the Tenderloin, and women, I guess I should say, but that's not how they were referred to. But yeah, a lot of what goes on in that neighborhood, the people are the victims, and the people who victimize them come from out of town.
Well, can you talk about the residents of the Tenderloin that are not just the homeless people who've moved into the SROs, but the general population?
Well, I think that really, like I'd mentioned, that so many of them, I think a third were actually, were disabled, and a third were seniors, or over 65. So that most people live on a fixed income. They either had Social Security, or they have had SSI, or they had no income, roughly. But people, when in the days when we were still reporting there, had been this. The rents are really a thing, a very contemporary. The incredibly high rents. And the supportive housing in the neighborhood is the only thing that maintains that population. It lets people stay there, because TNDC, for instance, or DISH, or Community Housing Partnership, those are really the programs that maintain some stability in the neighborhood and give people because they own the property where the people work, and they have contracts with the city for social workers to help them get the services that they need. So, TNDC has built some new housing and stuff there. And these are it's really why why the neighborhood isn't totally ravaged, but Curry Senior Center and Glide and St. Anthony's, and Salvation Army has them. That's why the neighborhood is a neighborhood actually still, and it's I never used to. I would never have felt unsafe actually in that neighborhood. I never ever felt like there was going to be a problem. Not that there wasn't, but it was much different than it is now. I think right now with fentanyl having basically taken over as the drug of choice in the neighborhood, I mean, when 2 people a day are dying from that, and yet they're still taking it, that says a lot about the neighborhood. And when we were writing, it wasn't like that. I mean, the study center actually was fiscal sponsor of the DOPE project, which eventually became integrated into the Department of Public Health. And the DOPE project is where the Nexalone and the Narcan that is administered for an overdose. And when they were a program of the study center, they were the only ones who were training people on how to use it and saving lives. And then when the Department of Public Health, which is a very, very progressive organization, really, that they do so much good, it took them in and made them a part of the department. Then that meant that now the police have Narcan and the fire department. So the number of lives, even though there's all these being lost, the number of lives that are being saved through, in effect, the DOPE Project as a nonprofit private provider being seen for its value by the Department of Public Health here, and brought in, and that whole concept has spread.
Okay, I've let this go over a little bit because can't really not. Marjorie, could you maybe have a few final words? And it's wonderful about the organizations and so on, and that's incredibly significant. There are also individuals. The fact that there are people like you involved and people that you've worked with or come across, so I want to say that. But if you could say something.
Just a few things about, if anyone wants to read more, Death in the Tenderloin is available online, the book, and it's available in bookstores like Bird and Beckett. Online, you can get access. Just put in Central City Extra and scroll down a little bit, and you will see some archives on PDFs online that you can read. The library, San Francisco Public Library, I think has our whole collection of hard copies of the newspaper. It's still something we're very proud of and very happy that we did it.
Yeah.
And I want to make an offer about the book that Tom, Marjorie, and I will sign 10 copies, and for the first 10 lucky people who give a donation to the nonprofit Bird and Beckett Legacy Project, $25 or more, please do, and you will get a signed copy, the 10 lucky folks.
All right. Well, we're very lucky to have you all here today. Thank you so very much. All right. Thank you for
Thank
coming out.
Thank you.
And
Thank
listening.
you.
I don't think we'll do one of these next week, but I think the week after we have one scheduled. It's some people involved in an anthology they've just published called Muslim American Women at Home, I believe. And it's San Francisco is definitely part of the world of the writers that some of them that contributed, but also writers from other spots in the States, I think. So that's 2 weeks from now, and we'll have these fairly often, maybe not weekly, but maybe twice a month on average. We'll see how it goes. But thank you guys.
Great.
So much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.